Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 300 of the podcast. It's February 15th, 2018. My guests today are Tracey and Ernie Richardson, authors of an excellent book titled The Toyota Engagement Equation: How to Understand and Implement Continuous Improvement Thinking in Any Organization. Now, I really enjoyed the book. It's full of solid insights and personal experiences from their time working for Toyota in Georgetown, Kentucky. In the podcast today, we talk about their experiences at Toyota, including lessons they've learned about problem solving, people development, and what they call DNA or D and A, discipline and accountability. So I hope you enjoyed the discussion, even if you work in healthcare or another realm outside of manufacturing. Ernie did some work within health clinics at Toyota and some other healthcare organizations. So we touch on that a bit, and there are definitely lessons learned here. It's about leadership. It's about people, and that really applies everywhere. So if you would like to find links to finding Tracey and Ernie on social media, their book's website, more information like that, you can go to leanblog.org/300. Tracey and Ernie, thank you for joining us to talk about your book today. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having us, Mark. We look forward to it.
Yeah, Mark, this is great. We enjoy doing the podcast and sharing our wisdom.
And you have a lot of wisdom in the book and a lot of stories, and I encourage everyone to check that out. And we'll touch on a couple topics today and hopefully pique everybody's interest. Tracey, if you can start off, there are a lot of personal stories in the book, which I really enjoyed. It really connects the lessons to some really engaging stories. But can you give kind of the brief intro? There's a lot of your career story in the book. Can you introduce some of your background and what you're doing now post Toyota?
Yeah, absolutely. So as most know, I was start at TMMK in 1988 when we were kind of rolling the startup phase, going there and being part of kind of the building things around us. It was before we were even making sellable vehicles. And so had the blessed opportunity to work with trainers. I started as a team member, so I was on the line in IP trim and realized very quickly that, there was an internal training system, with Toyota Institute and University of Toyota, and then our own training center that worked closely with TMC, Toyota Motor Corp. So I just, kind of put myself out there to say, this is going to be a neat path. And so I went through pre-promotion training, moved up from team leader, spent a few years as team leader, line supervisor hourly, and went back to school for leadership classes for moving on to salary management. So I spent 10 years from hourly position to salary in the plastics department, moving around in various areas from instrument panel to bumper injection molding to headliner bumper cores, a lot of various parts there in plastics, and was there until 1998. So I did 10 years in production, and Ernie and I made a decision. I wanted to go into HR, but that's not always easy when you're married to an HR manager. So we made a family decision, and I actually left my position as a full-time employee at Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Kentucky, and I kind of went in the back door and came back as a contractor, consultant, vendor, trainer, whatever word you want to use. And I became a trainer for Toyota across North America in the different plants. So went kind of sharing my wisdom, giving back to the plant that they had invested in me. And then a few years into that, I started to get a pull externally and joined LEI and worked for some colleges, worked with Ohio State in their MBOE program. And, we do a lot of conferences, Lean Frontiers and different things. So the pool of external took over. And, today we do mostly private client and go to their Gemba. And we do some conferences, speaking and other things like podcast and do a lot of things online, obviously. But Yeah, it's been 30 years from working on the line as a team member to consultant out there, sharing my wisdom of that collective 30 years. And it's been a really neat journey. We've really been blessed to be a part of that phase at Toyota.
And Ernie, if you can kind of weave in a little bit of your background, and your story and Tracey's stories intertwine here in different ways, but what you can tell us about your background, and you stayed longer at Toyota, if you can tell us about
actually,
that.
I spent my 25-year career at Toyota. Worked at IBM before I went to Toyota. Interesting about the problem-solving aspect of the two different companies. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the book. I spent the first half of my career in powertrain as a startup as a team leader, which is an hourly position. Worked my way up through the management and powertrain, and then moved over to human resources about halfway through my career, and then was able to, we always hear people talk about, that lean thing works in building cars, but non-production does it work in, and so I got to spend the last half of my career actually working in different fields in HR, and it does work everywhere, whether you're building cars or building safety systems or building medical clinics or medical processes. And so the last few years of my career at Toyota, in the 25-year career, I actually was operations medical director for Toyota North American wide. So we were responsible for clinic operations all across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And so I got to see firsthand how we can take the philosophies and the tools and the culture that we were taught in manufacturing years ago and actually start rolling that into healthcare, insurance companies, clinic operations, and those kinds of things. So it's pretty good. And in that area also, we worked on, I worked in safety at our plant in Kentucky. Also, disability management, how we process that, which is, as a lot of people knows, those processes need some help.
Yeah. Well, and we'll come back to the end of the podcast and talk about healthcare. I know there's a lot of people listening who are either working in healthcare, because they came from manufacturing and they've always been there. As they always say, patients are not cars. And well, yeah, of course not. But these methods work in different places. We could maybe someday we can do a whole podcast about. Yes. We could probably talk an hour about your experience in the clinics, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I won't. I'm not trying to put you on the hook for that. We'll
he would love to share that, because there was a lot of good things internally with Toyota and some of the things they created that is a story of its own, and being part of the probably the first processes that did that is kind of neat as well.
Yeah. So, one question I always love to ask authors is, what was the spark, the motivation behind the book? There's already a lot of books out there, about Toyota, the Toyota production system, and lean. So I'm curious, what was the genesis of you guys doing the book together?
Yeah, so the book the idea started about 10 years ago. I think it was 2007. So we're right on that 10-year mark when I started putting the chapters together. And the beginning of it was similar to what it is now, but a little more about me and kind of the biography type. And I kind of altered that to mesh in the beginning of Toyota. So I knew there was a story there to be written. 10 years ago, I wasn't maybe ready to tell it or understood the context of it. But, we've been told a lot since the book's been out that, hey, there hasn't been, from an inside perspective of somebody growing from, this floor level up through management to, training, consulting, et cetera, from what it was like, the day-to-day, the doing, the living, the breathing of that culture that we get so many questions about, how was it? And I really thought, and then, as Ernie was finishing his time, we were like, with his stories and my stories, and even though there are some parallels there, there's also some differences. And to bring somebody, we wanted to take somebody on a journey with us in how we learned. Everybody's on, today it's kind of called lean, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But how did we become who we are? What was that journey, and what was it like to be at Toyota? And so we wanted the journey to allow somebody to walk with us. And there's a lot of great books out there, and we've read a lot and know a lot of the authors that have written them. But we wanted to come in from an angle of, here's what it was like for us actually working there, and the failures, the successes, the trials and tribulations, the sometimes I don't understand why we're doing this question, really take you with us. And, from the feedback that we have been getting, it's coming across as we hope, that it's a journey with us and what it was like to be there. And from many people's perspectives, we didn't start off any different than most people do. We knew nothing. And, we had this blank canvas that, they kind of took us and molded us in many ways. And so the book resides in the living and breathing of the culture and how we learn from a firsthand perspective.
Yeah, and it's a unique perspective. I don't know any other books out there that were co-authored by somebody. You added value directly to the vehicles. You pulled the andon cord, I'm sure. I mean, that's a very, very real perspective, right?
Absolutely. And, I guess the uniqueness part for us, Markin, is that the really, when we were being developed on the culture side, we didn't know anything different. And the coin of lean came out at some point in time, and we all were internally wondering what this lean thing they're talking about is. And the reality of it is, it was the culture that was continually built, and got to experience it all the way from, some of the stories in the book of where it's okay to stop the line, and it's okay to have problems. It's okay to have problem solving. It's okay to take time to do those things, but we don't want to continue repeating them. So we got to develop standards and to be able to see that in place. And as you know, when we talk about standards, the accountability, discipline, accountability to standards is really hard for companies to live up to. And at Toyota, that was just our norm.
Mm-hmm. And I know from the book, Tracey, you were going to college when you started working at Toyota, and Ernie, you had that experience at IBM. And this is more of a general question: is it harder to embrace and understand some of these concepts when you've got habits from a more traditional non-Toyota like non-lean organization, as opposed to being more of a blank canvas at the start of a career?
Well, I think it is harder if you already have habits in place. However, I think the main ingredient, and I think the thing that Toyota kept teaching us, was being open to change and constantly looking. Let's learn from your habits or your processes in previous to coming, and what can we take from that? But here's what we're trying to build, and here's the vision we're trying to go to. So I think it's absolutely hard, but I don't think it's impossible. I honestly don't know it's any different when we started than a lot of companies. The difference is I guess we don't really use the excuse of, well, we don't have time to do it, or we don't know exactly what to do. Is that we were learning as we were going. So I do believe it's a problem, but it also can be the foundation for where you start.
So in that process, I mean, what did they do at Toyota, or what did you do as leaders, to encourage people to be open to change and to embrace that sort of mindset?
Well, and I didn't realize this when I first went in there for the first couple of years, but every single person there had a development plan, and that development plan was tailored to what was viewed as the strengths and weaknesses of the person and developed with the person. And so every single person that I had the opportunity to serve while I was there, had different needs. And so we didn't necessarily just make one size fits all. It was looking at every individual and understanding what do I need to do to continue to develop them into being we always talk about we're developing them to be the leaders someday. We're developing to be the presidents, the general managers, the vice presidents. What do we need to do to be able to do that? And one of my trainers, my main trainer that I talk about in the book, actually, he would ask me every single day when I got to be a leader, who did you develop today? And when I first started hearing that, I was thinking, man, he's kind of being hard on me, But then he was really reinforcing that culture. And then before we would end, because he would make me do this every single day. And before we would end, he would come back to me and say, now, what did you learn today? And so he's always trying to understand my development for how do I include the team? How do I develop people? And by the same time, then he's, training and developing me to do that with other folks that we served.
And Mark, I think when you go back to our hiring process that, Ernie and I both went through, and which was about a 1.5 year process because they were building the plan and we all didn't have anywhere to go early on. So it was kind of drawn out, but there was competencies that I learned later that they were looking for in people. And so when you were tested, they were looking for listening. They were looking for personal initiatives, leadership skills, problem solving skills, your ability to work with people. And so those competencies were underlying. So, when I began, David Meyer was my first group leader. He's the co-author of Toyota Way Field Book and Toyota Talent with Jim Liker. And so, I was honestly an introverted person if you look at Myers-Briggs personality type testing, which we all had to go through as leaders in the early days at Toyota. I was an introverted person, but I must have tested at a certain level for leadership. And so David worked with me on speaking in front of, other people, our group, and then expanded that. And there's a picture in the book. And, when I look at it, I see the terror in my eyes because of my nerves that were happening at that moment. But, I did a presentation, a quality circle. It was an outcome from a quality circle that we did in the group. And so that particular day, Mr. Toyota came by and we had to do a presentation. And so, part of Toyota's development piece that Ernie's talking about, the IDPs was, David asked me, do you want to do part of the presentation? And that made me nervous. But the next level was you're going to have to use a microphone, and that just, oh my gosh, I'm going to be projected all over the plastic shop. It really terrified me. But, he took a moment and said, at any given time, if you feel so nervous that you don't think you can do it, just transition it to me and I will take over. And that's all I needed. Sometimes you just need like that fight or flight, you need an out. And it was those little things like that the trainers were developing David was developing me as well as our other leaders. And, that moment that was captured, that's very priceless to me and why it's in the book, was such a developmental kind of just path that took me off as a confidence builder to do more and more. And I think Toyota really just invests in people that way. We've always said that, they happen to, make cars, but developing people is the first and foremost. Cars are the outcome of a good people process. And there's so many little stories like that both of us were a part of that, we just embraced that, it really created who we are today.
So, along that line of developing people, having a plan, tailoring it to individuals, does that seem to be an aspect of the Toyota expression, respect for people, respect for humanity? I mean, what else does that phrase, respect for people, mean to you from your experience there?
Well, I think it definitely starts with the individual development. But I also think it talks about the leadership styles within Toyota, the ability to, as Mr. Cho says several times, and when you go to the Gemba, you got to show respect to the people. That means you've got to try to understand what he's trying to say there. Is you got to try to understand the opportunities and problems they're going through, and not just look for an outcome that you want. And so, go see, ask, why, and show respect was his quote. And it was, I've got to understand what the issues are going through. And that's not uncommon at Toyota. It's fairly common that, a supervisor may very well go down and just go on the line to understand what the problem is the team member's facing. I've seen several presidents do that before, actually. Where they would see abnormality happen and say, well, train me on it. I want to be able to see it. And so I think it's always the ability to be able to make the connection with employee and understanding in true servant leadership, they are the most important people that we have. And so how we as leaders got to continue to be able to support to make their job easier and more effective. And being able to connect that to, their goals and objectives that they're trying to get individually.
Yeah, when you look at the Green Book, I think people call it, but the Green Toyota Way book, that's 2001, it has the 5 values, but it comes from 2 pillars. And one pillar is continuous improvement, and one is the respect for people. And like you said, I think the respect for people side is truly people are first. The product is the outcome of that. And, the 5 values that stem from that, is in the Japanese word, they use Genchi Genbutsu, which is the get your boots on. But the go see was one of the values in the Green Book, the teamwork part. So these stem off the continuous improvement and respect for people. And then challenge, which goes to the IDP, the individual aspect, and then respect for people comes up as one of the 5, and then continuous improvement. So to me, in the Toyota Way 2001, it's trying to bring tangible actions for leadership to say, you can go see, you can challenge yourself. We had to respect people through Mr. Cho's thinking and vision of the go see, ask why, and show respect, and then challenge ourselves, challenge the company, challenge others, and then all that creates this learning environment of CI. So the values were more than just writing on a wall or in a book. They were lived, they were practiced, and that's what created the cultural, the climate, the feeling, the atmosphere that it's very hard to describe to people sometimes what it was like, because none of us really internally in the early days, there was no reason to call it anything, honestly, because it was the only acronym we knew, and I make a joke about it, but it was really reality for us, is JOB. This is our job. This is what we do. This is who we are. This is what we represent. It's a way to do business, and we didn't need the acronym. And I think that just came later as others tried to describe something that, was being written down by then in a lot of books and other things. It's very dynamic to be inside that breathing culture that starts with that Toyota Way, I believe.
Yeah. And so was JOB used as an acronym?
No, not really. That's my way of saying it was that simple, because it was our job. It was an expectation. It wasn't a choice. And the expectation goes to, part of our formula that we talk about is DNA. There's a macro level DNA with, every human. If you look up DNA, you get this, definition that might be something of what's the fundamentals and characteristics that make up, humans. But there's that DNA level in a company. So it's cultural DNA. But then you have this micro level DNA, which Ernie and I dubbed as this, kind of discipline and accountability. Mm-hmm. And if there's anything that Toyota is not a perfect company. I always tell folks nothing's perfect. There is no perfect, setting where there isn't problems. The Japanese trainers would get scared if there wasn't problems every day. We want to understand how to get to an ideal state at all times. But the discipline and accountability, I believe, is the difference in how they were successful and are successful today, is that seed in there that is strong, within all members, all leadership, horizontally and vertically across the organization, I believe.
Yeah. So when you talk about the D and A, as you write about in the book, discipline and accountability, how do you, those are words everybody knows, but how do you define those words? Or how were those words generally understood at Toyota?
So I'll start, and then Tracey can add in some points, but let's go back to standards. So the discipline would be that we would not operate our processes without standards. And the accountability is that we have to follow through on the standard. That's the reason we have the standard until the next best idea. So the concept is, the discipline is making sure that we have a way to work, and then the expectation of that is the way we work. And people think that's or when we talk about that, people think that's very, very rigid. The reality of it is, within Toyota, it's just the way we do business. It's our way of life. It's our expectation, and it gives us the foundation to be able to make Kaizen or improvement. And so when we go to other companies, that's the biggest challenge we have most of the time is, we start out with problem solving and we'll talk about, well, what's your standard? And they go, well, we don't have one. And then you get into, well, we have standards, but we don't pay no attention to them. And so that's the discipline apart from a company perspective. And I think, Mark, the concept of, when companies are asking us all the time of, well, what do we need to do first? And so what we always talk about, well, have the discipline to use standards, and then the accountability to make the standard work. And therefore, you can give you the foundational part of being able to now make improvements and improve as an organization.
Yeah, I think to add to that is, the discipline to set the work standards, one thing. The accountability, when Ernie and I define a standard or a work standard, work procedure, SOPs, there's so many different variations. People don't have to use the word standard. Sometimes that, as Ernie said, it's a rigid, oh gosh, that's a terrible word, but it's just an expectation of, hey, it's the best known method at this moment that we have consensus to follow until we improve. So to me, that lessens the blow to say, hey, we've all had the opportunity to agree and have consensus, so we're on board. So that's part of respect for people to get their ideas for the work standard. And then, okay, we're going to follow this because it allows us to quickly see abnormality. It allows us to have the benchmark for improvement. As Ernie said, there's so many companies that don't totally understand continuous improvement as what it is, or what do you need to do it. And so if you don't have a standard, it goes back to Taiichi Ono. His simple words would be no standard, no Kaizen, which in our regular words would say, if you don't have a standard, it's impossible to truly measure continuous improvement. So I think when you go back to the DNA question, one, the discipline to set it, two, the accountability to say, I'm going to follow it, and to respect the person enough to give them the reason and the purpose why it's important. if we sell, tell, and convince people to do things on a daily basis, it's going to be a very, difficult process to get people to understand. If I engage, involve, and empower them in creating this standard together, it's a much more, you got a higher percentage of this teamwork and this respect for people thinking, this cultural thing we're trying to create. And it's their idea. It's not mine. It's not me telling it. And I think that was the powerful piece with our culture, that we knew the standard was probably going to change through people having ideas to make it better. And that was part of that JOB expectation. We wanted it to. We wanted to encourage that, but we also had to train to it, make sure we understand, stabilize it, sustain it, then get it ready for improvement. So I think culturally that was a big difference for us, and why we kind of created that DNA at a micro level of this, because a lot of companies, it's kind of like saying, hey, we have the speed limit sign out there on the roadways and we know it because it's actually a law. It's probably beyond the standard, but we choose to follow it or not, but if a cop's sitting there, policing the road, what do? By natural response, we hit the gas. So it's like we know and understand now what's the DNA inside our culture. Like neighborhoods, we all tend to drive slower because, there's a reason. Children, people walking, there's a reason why. Seatbelts are the same way, So how do we get the buy-in and the why and the purpose behind it? When that's absorbed and understood, people will work for you all day if you take the time and invest in that. I truly believe that, because they did with us. I lived and breathed that, and we did, for other people, we see that happen as well.
And so, you talk about the sort of intertwining concepts of standards, standardized work, Kaizen, continuous improvement. Those words, discipline. Discipline means having discipline, not being disciplined. Right.
Exactly. It's like anything. Go to the gym. I'm going to be disciplined to go 3 times a week. Yes, exactly.
So, so when you talk about the gym, that's very self-driven discipline. I mean, what was the process in the workplace? Did the word accountability come into play if somebody was not being disciplined in the way they went about doing something, or how did that enter into it?
Well, I don't think not following the standard was an option, any aspect of, because we want to have repeatable processes to be able to see gaps. And so it wasn't an option for someone to say, well, I want to do it my way. Obviously, if it's a better way, we want them to be able to change the standard, and constantly changing the standard is what we really reinforce. But the discipline part would come in place through HR policies and procedures to be able to ensure that the person's performing it in that correct way. And we always looked at it as why is the person not following the standard first, and making sure the process is stable and not penalizing the person if the process is bad. And so we would look at the process and then, work with the person to come up with the best solution. But not following standards is not an option.
So I think, I ask a follow-up, kind of from the perspective of people working in healthcare, this idea that, this all goes hand in hand. People in healthcare might say, well, our people have or feel like they have a lot of freedom to not follow the standard. And then sometimes people will say, well, wait a minute, there really isn't a well-defined standard either. So how do you hold somebody accountable to a standard that's either not defined or, a system that's not well designed to allow people to be successful? I heard one of your former Toyota colleagues, Daryl Wilburn, talk about this at a conference, saying that it was the obligation of leaders to create a system in which people could be successful, and that's, I think, not the kind of servant leadership mindset that we see in healthcare as the default. So what are your similar thoughts, to people who may be experiencing a very different type of environment?
Yeah. So I think to start with, the definition of standardization is very very confusing for some folks. So I'll start with saying, standards are put in place for processes that we need to have control. The outputs need to be controlled. And we put enough standardization in place to be able to control the output, but not so much standardization in place that it constricts the process or keeps a person from being able to perform. Now, my experience in healthcare is, and of course I'm limited on I worked in the clinics at Toyota and with some local hospitals. But the first thing I would say is they're looking, the ones that I were involved with was looking at standardization as a roadblock. And what we had to kind of help them see is standardization is the foundation. So even in processes where people have to make split-second decisions and split-second in different directions in what they may perform, we still want to have standardized work or standardization on how they try to make those decisions and what helps them make those decisions. So the misconception that I saw in these areas, and it's not in the healthcare, it's a lot of areas that are, I will say, a lot of areas non-manufacturing is, the ability to have creativity from the person and flexibility. And certainly standards make that more possible. That makes it more definable. And the ability to be able to develop a gradual standardization. And you want to standardize as much as we can, but not constrict the people from being able to perform their processes. So I would say that, and Mark, you probably have a better feel than I do on this, but I would say that all processes can have a standard. It's the ability to, in healthcare, do we need a standard for everything is the first question. And just from my limited experience in insurance and healthcare, I would say that the bigger issue for me is people not being able to see what the outcome of standardization would do for them.
Yeah.
They see it as a roadblock and not seeing it as how it can be a springboard for improvement.
Yeah, I agree. And as an outsider, my study of Toyota and the Toyota books makes it really clear that we shouldn't standardize for the sake of standardizing. It's about the purpose and the results and that we're going for. And then there's that level, that degree of standardization where people in healthcare, I try to be empathetic. People are, when they're pushing back against what they think lean is, they're pushing back based on history. Doctors, nurses, others have for many decades had people telling them how to do their work, and these phrases of cookbook medicine and come up and you're right. I think they're rightfully afraid of having standards that are too rigid, but I think they've also been victim of others pushing standards that are inappropriately rigid.
I totally agree with that, actually, and also my limited experience would say is once the healthcare providers see the purpose and understand the value, then they're actually huge advocates for it and become a very big springboard because they honestly healthcare the vision for healthcare is want to be the most effective and efficient process possible for the health of their patients, and so they can do that using we call it standardization to be able to control the chaos somewhat. And so, but I think my experience would say that most healthcare providers, once they get understanding that, and it's not going to be so much standardization, it completely makes them feel like a robot.
Right.
That now all of a sudden it becomes kind of the way they do business.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind as we're talking, and you've probably heard it. People say it all the time, the 5 who's and the root blame. The people fear sometimes that, they're going to be blamed for something. It's so rigid. I'm not going to be able to remember all that. Or maybe they haven't had, the JIT or the TWI. It's kind of like, here, follow this. We kind of give them maybe a potentially broken process that we blame them for. They're the face of the process. And our trainers always grounded us around, always look at the process before you look at the person. Mm-hmm. And are we giving them badly designed processes that are actually, failing? They actually will fail. And then the face of that is the person, doing the work. So that's another facet. I think that it's a paradigm shift in this whole thing around standardization and if we look purely at what does the customer internally, externally need this process to produce, whether it's a patient, whether it's a person buying a vehicle or any type of output, material and information flow, whatever I'm producing, I want to try to do that in the most value-added way. And there was an aspect within Toyota, we called it mental burden. We actually factored in mental burden of how many decisions do they make within this transaction or within this process or within this, window of time. For us, we worked in minutes, but externally it could be a half hour, an hour. It could be any particular thing a person's doing. And if there were X amount of decisions being made, let's say it's over 10 decisions in a certain amount of time, then quality or this process could have the ability to, have a defect or a abnormality or discrepancy. And so when we involve people in asking the questions, and this should be, at the process at the beginning, but where the work's happening, no matter what work it is, we should ask, what decisions are we making? What's, the material and information flow of the process? How are we doing this and X or whatever that might be? I don't want it to make it be about cars, but when we get in there and ask the questions, we realize, wow, there's a lot to this. And does it need a standard? As Ernie said, standards are meant to control and to see abnormality and understand, what's all involved. And sometimes we go in and we find things that don't need to be in there. So when you can have that conversation at the Gemba, I believe, and involve the people that, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. It's not this rigid thing. And let's create it together. I think you have that, you get more buy-in, and that starts slowly to create the culture of I'm here to help, not here to hinder.
Yeah. Well, and kind of, stepping back to the book, and, as we wrap up here again, I'll encourage everyone to go check out the Toyota engagement equation. That equation, which I'll leave for people to get out of the book, but you talked about DNA, the D and A. What you're talking about there, Tracey, reminds me of the part of the equation, the E cubed, everybody, every day, engaged. That, from my perspective, seems to be sadly missing from a lot of what healthcare organizations would call lean. They're not having conversations with people about their work. They're trying to tell them how to do their work. I personally get frustrated when I see that sort of thing labeled lean.
Yes. And, it kind of, obviously it started, I think lean came from obviously the Toyota production system. And, how do we articulate that externally? And then I think from the EQ perspective, I think a trainer a few years later said, it's not really about Toyota. It's the thinking production system, kind of Gen 2 TPS that, we're encouraging people to think. We want it to be about how every day everybody is engaged in looking for abnormality from a standard to be able to have this continuous improvement. And Gen 3 TPS, which is in the latter part of the book, and we talk about it within the E cubed, is instead of the thinking production system, taking it away from production, it's really the essence of the thinking people system. And so, the everybody every day engaged, that was, I think, an important factor of our culture, and an expectation that no matter what level, no matter what silo or functional area that you're in, we're all here from an order to customer perspective. And if there's waste, it takes all of us in all of our functional areas. We're not a we and a they, we're an us. And if we're the thinking people system, which I call the Gen 3 TPS, then it takes us all to think and understand and have that line of sight from my individual work, how it, contributes maybe to my department, how it contributes to the organization, and in some cases, global perspective for some companies. And I think that was something that we really embraced internally and were taught from a very early, stage, that it takes everybody. And me putting my initials on the inside of an instrument panel was my E-cube. I had to look at that from the perspective, but knowing that on 1 million cars out there from the late 80s to the late 90s, my name is on it. And I deemed that good, because there was processes in place that I was following and understood the purpose of, and felt like I was really part of something that I helped create this beautiful, product, or it could be service for people. So I think looking at it from the perspective of thinking people system, it really, can change the way people think about this lean thing, or however it's being coined today, from just a bad thing to just let's think differently and let's all engage in that for the greater good of not we and they, but us as an organization.
Yeah. Well, that's I think that's a great point to wrap things up on. So, Ernie and Tracey, where can people learn more about the book? If you want to give a website address for that, places they can find you on social media, perhaps, or if you want to give your email address if people have questions.
Absolutely. Both of us are on LinkedIn, so you can ask to be a connection there. Both of us are on there. I'm the Twitter person, so it's Tracey underscore Son, Tracey Son on Twitter. Try to be on there as much as possible. We started a website for the book just recently. It's the Toyota EE.com. So the Toyota engagement equation, and EE.com, the Toyota EE. And you can sign up for a mail listserv there on that. And we try to share things, on occasion. We've got chapter 11 on there if people want to see a chapter before they purchase the book. It's there to share. And, Amazon, there's been some great feedback on Amazon as well with the book, so people can see what other people are reading. And then our emails are on the website, the Toyota EE. So you can find us out there socially. We're out and about when we're not on the road. We're kind of chatting on the internet with you and others out there in the lean world.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing all that. And thank you for a book that I think is a very welcome and enjoyable addition to the lean literature. I really appreciate it. And want to thank both of you. Our guests again today have been Tracey and Ernie Richardson. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. We appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.